Well, hey, Hope Mill students, how you guys doing? It's Gideon here, coming to you from my bedroom, actually, in the middle of the day. Before we get started, I wanted to apologize once again for having to cancel cancel the meeting, very, very late notice. Again, like I said in the email, but also in the Instagram story, if you saw that, there was just a lot of miscommunication as to what the site was actually going to be used for today. And so we just figured that if one party was wrong or right, it was just better to go ahead and cancel actually meeting at the Hope Mills site. So I apologize for that. That ruined any plans for you guys. But I'm still thankful that we have the miracle of technology to be able to keep up with the message series. So we are in week 2 of Origin Story. Last week we had a lot of fun with that. If you were there, we played an activity. We had an activity called Marvel Madness, and pretty much it was March Madness, but Marvel movie related. And so last week's message was actually a recap of our origin story, of mankind's origin story, about how we were created in the image of God, how the Bible actually says that Jesus is the image of God, and that when we place our faith in Jesus and allow him to transform us from the inside out, then he's actually able to give us the power to live a life that goes way beyond what we could have asked, thought, or imagined when we allow him to work through us. And so this week, the hero that we're talking about this week is not a fictional hero, actually. It's a real life hero. It's a guy named Terrence Lester, and he is the visionary founder of an organization called Love Beyond Walls, which is based in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're going to be talking about their campaign, which is called the hashtag Hire Mark campaign. If you were on social media last year at any time, you probably saw a little bit of this, not too much, but the backstory behind this was one day Terrence was in the back of his organization, Love Behind Walls. And in the back of his organization, they find this guy named Mark, and Mark is actually going through the garbage to find something to eat. And so what's really cool about his organization is that instead of calling the police or kicking him off property, what they did instead was they actually allowed him to come inside. They're all about fostering relationships. So they allowed him to come inside and talk to them a little bit, and they got a chance to hear his story. And so what they found out was that Mark literally had nothing. He had no birth certificate, he had no ID, he had no job, and he was literally squatting, meaning he was staying he was going from abandoned house to abandoned house just so that he can have a room over his head at night. He had absolutely nothing. Then they went further on in the story. Apparently, he had lost contact with his children, and so they talked a little more to him, and asked him what his goals were. And obviously, his goals were, to get identification, to get a birth certificate, to get a job so that he can be financially stable. But one of his bigger goals was to regain contact with his kids. And so that touched Terrence's heart. And so the next day he talked to his elite team, he talked to the board for his organization, and they just decided, you know what? There's nothing stopping us. Nothing should stop us. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go and give Mark all the help that we can give him. And so the first thing that they did was they got this guy identification. That was literally an 8-month process. They got him a birth certificate. They actually had to get him 2 separate IDs, because apparently when you're suffering through homelessness, you have to have a specific ID in order to get a social security number. So they got him a birth certificate. They got him a special ID. They got him. They got this guy They got this guy social security number. They got him all the identification that he needed. But during that time, they also helped him to write a resume, and they're also helping him to potentially find a job. And so they also got him a suit and everything. We're going to have the video in the description. It's going to do a much better job explaining the story. So if you want to watch the full story, it's going to be in the description. But this is what Terrence said to Mark one day. Terrence looked at Mark and said, "You know what? We got you this suit. We got you this resume. We got you all your identification papers. We got you everything. If I got to stand on a street corner every single day with a sign that says hire Mark, I'm going to do it until you get hired." And so Mark, he thought it's like, oh, okay, he's just joking. He doesn't really mean it. Well, apparently Terrence was not joking, because the next day he got one of those wearable signs and painted the words hire Mark on those signs, went out into the street with Mark, walking up and down the streets wearing the sign that said hire Mark. And that got a lot of people's attention. So obviously a lot of people stopped by and they chatted for a little bit. Mark was able to get some encouragement from people. They were also able to raise funds for Mark because people were able to hear his story, and so they were compelled just to give a few dollars or so to help him out. But during this about 6-7 day period, they were actually able to hand out his resume, Mark's resume, to multiple people so that he can be hired somewhere. So they were literally going above and beyond helping this guy getting a job. So one day, one of Terrence's friends, he's scrolling on social media, and he sees hashtag hire Mark. And so he checks it out. He's like, what is this? He checks it out, sees some of the video updates that they're making for Mark, and says, you know what? I want to go ahead and help these guys out. I want to help this guy out by giving him a suit. A tailor-made suit, actually. That's for free. If you ever had a suit tailor-made, it's expensive, but he wanted to do this specifically for free. So they got Mark, they took him to the shop to get a suit, and the shop that was making Mark's suit actually hired Mark to be a part of their team. So he went in to get a suit, he came out having a job. And a couple weeks later, because of the funds that they were able to build up for him while on the street with the hire Mark sign, they were actually able to pay for temporary housing for Mark. So he no longer was homeless. He had a job. He had identification. He had a roof of his own, at least temporary, until he was able to get more financially stable. And so they checked up on him months afterwards and found out that he did get more financially stable. He did get a permanent place of residence, but not only that, he was able to reconnect with his children. And guys, this is that whole story it absolutely blew my mind. Again, if you want to watch the whole video, we're going to have the link in the description. But again, this story blew my mind. See, Terrence and his team at Love Beyond Walls, they didn't have any superhuman skills or talents, but they did something for Mark. They did something. That's what made them superheroes for Mark. They said, you know what? We're going to give up our time, our talent, our treasure, and we're going to do something to help this guy in his life. Now, when we hear stories like this one, obviously we're moved. I mean, you just saw a minute ago, I was actually at loss for words as to how moved I was at this story, because there's something so inspiring about seeing people do heroic things for each other. Now, Terrence didn't have to save the entire world, but he did make a dramatic difference in one person's life. Now, speaking of saving the world, there is one person who actually did save the world. His name is Jesus. We talk about him every week. Jesus, of course, did save the world, but that's not all that Jesus did. Jesus showed heroic love and kindness and care for specific people. And then he told us to go out and do the same. In fact, we actually see this exemplified on the night that Jesus was actually going to be betrayed. He was going to be arrested and sentenced to death. He actually did something that was pretty revolutionary. So if you have a Bible with you, or if you got the Bible app, or if you you've got Google open, go ahead and go over to John chapter 13. We're going to start at verse 1. And I'm going to be reading this from the Message version of the Bible because this version is actually very, very in your face. Not in your face, I'm sorry. It's very blunt about the situation going on. So we're going to go to John chapter 13. We're going to start at verse 3, not verse 1. We're going to start at verse 3. It says this: Jesus knew that the Father had put in him complete charge of everything, that he came from God and was on his way back to God. So he got up from the supper table, set aside his robe, and put on an apron. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet of his disciples, drying them with his apron. And we're going to go down to verse 12. I'm going to skip a little bit of the story. We're going to go down to verse 12. Towards the end, actually it was when he got done, finished washing his disciples' feet. And then he said, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You address me as teacher and master, and rightly so. That's who I am. So if I, the master and teacher, wash your feet, you must now wash each other's feet. I laid down a pattern for you. What I've done, you do. I am only pointing out the obvious. A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer. If you understand what I'm telling you, act like it and live a blessed life." Now, this moment is actually very significant for two reasons. One, the disciples' feet were definitely disgusting at this point. I mean, this was 2,000 years ago in a third world country in the Middle East. So they didn't have closed-toed shoes like we do. They had sandals, and they walked everywhere. I mean, obviously there were no cars or Uber or anything, but they didn't even have, according to the Bible, they did not use like camels or horses, or I mean, we see Jesus use a donkey once, but they walked everywhere. That was the normal method. They just walked everywhere. So obviously, not only is there going to be sweat on their feet, but there was dust, dirt, even maybe some animal droppings were in between their toes at some point. So not only were their feet really, really stinky and disgusting, it was actually very unsanitary to touch someone's feet, especially when they just got off a large journey. That's why they had servants doing that. It was not customary for someone who was in a place of leadership to touch someone's feet. But here's the thing. Jesus wasn't just a friend serving his peers. He was their mentor. He was their leader. He was their rabbi, their teacher. And so for him to take on a servant's role and to wash his disciples' feet, the disciples, they've had to have been embarrassed, uncomfortable, and by social standards, they were probably like, man, this is wrong. In fact, if you read the whole story, you actually see Peter kind of stop Jesus and say, "What are you doing? Don't wash my feet." Because socially, this was not something that leaders did. But by washing his disciples' feet, this was Jesus' way of caring for them, serving them, and teaching them something very important. Before his greatest act of selfless love, which was dying on the cross, Jesus modeled love on a smaller scale by humbling himself, becoming a servant, and washing his disciples' feet. Now, later on that same night, Jesus said something else to his disciples. So go ahead and jump down with me to John 13. Still John 13. We're going to go to verse 34 through 35. And he says this. This is one of the last things he said before he was arrested. He said, "Let me give you a new command. Love one another. In the same way I loved you, you love one another. This is how everyone will recognize that you are my disciples, when they see the love you have for each other." Jesus, our hero, taught love and care for others, but also modeled it. This love and this care that he talked about so frequently, he didn't just teach it. He didn't just preach it. He lived it. And the other thing is that Jesus spoke these words knowing exactly what was about to happen to him. He knew that he was going to be betrayed by one of his own disciples, one of the people that he washed their feet. He knew that they were going to betray him, that he was going to be falsely accused, that he was going to be beaten and brutally murdered. And yet he still went out of his way to show extraordinary love, not only to his disciples, but to people like you and me. See, for Jesus, love and care just aren't empty words. He showed his love and care for people through small acts of care, like washing his disciples' feet, or through huge acts of sacrifice, like dying for our behalf. Now, we may never have to literally lay our lives down for others, but we can still be heroic and love people and care for people like Jesus. See, this love that Jesus is talking about, it's not just, it goes deeper than just buying someone a gift or doing a simple task for them. This is much deeper than the high school love that you see all throughout your school. Like, oh, hey, I think you're cute. Oh, I like you. No, 2 weeks later, I love you. You know, that's not the love that Jesus is talking about. This love goes much deeper. See, this love is not motivated to do something for someone so that it can get something in return. It's not trying to get something out of someone else. It is completely 100% sacrificial. Jesus didn't care for people to be flashy or to show his power. He cared for people to show them the depth of his love. And Jesus didn't hold back his kindness until there was a crowd or there was someone who was going to be able to write down what he did. He didn't just wait to be kind until there was someone who was going to publish this out to the masses. He cared for people right in front of him with no agenda and no reward. Now, you might be able to say well, Gideon, there's a whole book about Jesus. You know, there's 4 Gospels. We have a ton of accounts about what Jesus did. And that's true. You're right about that. But if you get to the end of John's Gospel, he actually said that if you were to write down every single thing that Jesus did, there wouldn't be a library big enough in the world to contain all the things that he did. He didn't just do things for people in front of people. He did it behind closed doors where no one else can see it. Apparently, most of the acts that Jesus did, we don't even know about. That's how deep his love is. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't showy. It wasn't trying to get anything out of people. It was purely to show them how deep his love was for them. Now, in the same way that Jesus heroically cared for people in front of him, he also calls us to do the same. He calls us to do the same because, and this is the message for the whole week. This is the big picture for the whole week. He calls us to do the same because heroes care for the people that are in front of them. Heroes care for the people that are in front of them. So this week, I want to issue a challenge to the Hope Mill student group. Just look around. Start looking around and seeing is there anyone around here that I can show the love of Jesus? Keep your eyes open. Actually, there are 5 really simple ways that you can do this throughout the week. And they're all relatively free, and they're all relatively simple to do. So the first one is smile at someone who's alone. Now don't give a creepy smile. Don't be that guy that's just like hiding from the bushes, like, hey, like don't be that guy. But smile at someone who's alone. A smile says so much, even if you don't even know the person. It goes such a long way, just giving someone a simple smile. The second thing you can do is surprise someone by asking them how their day's going. Sometimes you just need someone to check on you. You just need someone to ask you if your day is going okay. Sometimes you just need someone to talk to you. So go ahead and surprise someone and ask them how their day is going. You might give someone something that they need, like maybe the weather's changing here in Fayetteville, thank God. But maybe you might be able to give them a jacket if you have an extra jacket, or if it gets cold enough, you might want to give them your gloves. And it might even be something even simpler as just handing a pen to someone when they need it in class, or letting someone look at your notes from class so that they can keep up with the assignments. Simple things like that, helping someone, giving a resource to help them throughout their day will speak volumes and volumes of love to them. And finally, not finally, no, we're at number 4. Ask someone a question about themselves and then really listen for their answer. Read between the lines. If you ask someone, hey, how you doing? And they go, fine. They're obviously not doing fine. So definitely read between the lines and see if there's any way that you can help them out. And finally, pay attention to how people are feeling. If you see someone hurting or angry, see if there's any way that you can make them feel better. Sometimes people just need a good laugh to forget about the worries of the world. Sometimes they need someone to give advice to them, and other times it might just be as simple as having someone sit next to you. But pay attention to the way others are feeling and see if there is a way that you can help them out. These are all really, really simple things you can do. But sometimes the most heroic things that we can do are the smallest things. But what I've learned throughout my 24 years of life is that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the most meaningful impact on people. We don't need to have superpowers to change the world, but we do need to be willing to care for others the way Jesus cared for us. Heroes care for the people that are in front of them. So this is my question for you guys this week. Who are you going to heroically care for? And how are you going to do it? And it's at this point I'm going to go ahead and sign off. In the description below, we have the small group questions for you guys. So this is a challenge. This is another challenge I want to issue to you guys. If you have friends that come to the student group, or if you have siblings, or maybe you guys can get on a Skype call and go through those questions and really dive deep with each other throughout the week whenever you guys have a chance to. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, I'm so sorry we weren't able to meet this week, but we will be back next week at the Hope Mills site. Yes, we will be meeting at the Hope Mills site for part 3 of Origin Story. So we'll see you guys next week. Peace.